Mr. Speaker.
Jami-Lee Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't be making any personal endorsements, but I'm looking forward to running the campaign of another team this year as I did last local body elections. Mr. Speaker, it's my first opportunity to speak on this bill, and I wish to congratulate Alfred Nara on bringing this so far through the House. I must admit, when it was first discussed between Alfred and I and other members, I was a little sceptical, but I have to say the list member based in Te Arotu, soon to be the member for Te Arotu, is a very persuasive individual, and he has brought me round. And I am pleased to say that I'm happy to support this bill along with my colleagues here tonight. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, if we can, if you just give me an opportunity to reflect back a little bit on the history of how local boards came about and their predecessors, because I think it's worthwhile considering those matters when we talk about the process used for electing members of local boards. As some of my colleagues know, I was a member of the Manukau City Council and the Auckland Council, very briefly. For my sins, I was elected to the Auckland Council, found a better place to come to, only for about one day, Mr. Parker. Then I resigned from the Auckland Council, but I found a better place to come to Parliament. But Mr. Speaker, I was a member of the Manukau City Council, but back in the day before we had local boards, city councillors actually were appointed to community boards. And so we were in a position where I served on a city council and also served on a community board. And some might ask themselves whether there's some similarities there between members serving on one local board or two local boards or three local boards all at the same time. I think there are some differences though, because I've heard this argument before. How is it that up and down the country, members can sit on a city council and then sit on a community board as well, but now the government's trying to pass, or a member of the government side is trying to pass a piece of legislation saying people can't sit on two local boards. And I think the difference, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that when it comes to members of a city council sitting on a community board as well, they're representing the same area. So the decisions that they make and the decision-making processes that they go through internally when they come to a decision on how to vote on a matter before the council or a matter before the community board, they're taking into account the interests of the same people. Because whether they're sitting as a member of a community board or sitting as a member of a local authority, they're still representing the same people that voted for them. The difference when it comes to local boards and a member sitting on more than one local board is at all times when they're making decisions, they have to weigh up, and this may be difficult for some of them, the competing interests of different local boards. And so if a member was, for example, just to use my local area, a member of the Howick local board and a member of the Manurewa local board, I can imagine situations where there are issues that could cross borders, or issues where the two local boards are working on decisions or working on projects together, where a member could be in a position where they are unable to do justice to one particular local board. Of course, if they're on three local boards, as we know has been the case, and maybe on a district health board as well, maybe on a licensing trust too, there are so many competing interests that a member's having to take into account. And so after discussing issues like this with my friend and colleague, future MP for Te Arotu, sorry for the birthday present there, Mr. Twyford, when I discussing this with my friend and colleague, the future MP for Te Arotu, Alfred Nara, hey, he doesn't have a Chinese surname, Mr. Twyford, so you don't go laughing, Mr. Twyford. When I've discussed this with Alfred Nara, I can see the logic. What's that? No, David Bennett's a friend of mine. I'm on the same committee as him. Two of them, actually. For my sins, I'm on two committees with David Bennett. It's an enjoyable Thursday and Wednesday morning for me. Getting back to the point. You're distracting me. Getting back to the point. When discussing this issue with Alfred Nara, I can see the logic in what he is suggesting, that it's important that when members are on local boards, that they are sitting there representing a particular community and can do justice to that role, and can ensure that without fear or favour, without competing electoral interests, because at the end of the day, when one is sitting as a local board member, they will inevitably, as politicians do, have a little bit of an eye on the next election. We wouldn't want local board members to be sitting in a local board meeting, making a decision as a local board member with an eye to an election in a different patch, a different area, which could influence their decision-making on the local board where they're sitting on at that point in time. So, Mr. Speaker, I can see the logic in this bill. I think it's also worthwhile considering the breadth of issues that local boards now deal with, because the local boards are very different from the community boards of old. The community boards of old were very good as representation areas where local issues can get representation and get a hearing at a local level, and where community boards can be the eyes and ears and the voice of their community. But my experience has been that the local boards that we now have in Auckland have a much greater role to play in the governance of Auckland than community boards do. Of course, the model of Auckland Council right now is very different from the old model in Auckland, where community boards were almost subservient to the territorial local authority. Now local boards are actually part of a co-governance model. It's co-governance between the governing body, the council laws and the mayor, and the local boards. They're not, when we look at an organisational chart, they're not underneath the council. They are next door to the council. They are co-governors of Auckland. And so the breadth of issues that local board members now deal with are much greater. That leads us to the argument that it would be more difficult for a local board member to sit on more than one local board, given the roles and responsibilities that they now have to deal with. And given that the local boards now deal with such greater roles, it's important that greater transparency around the electoral process is in place too. Because I think it's fair and reasonable that a voter, when they go to vote and they go to consider their voting form, that they have greater transparency about whether a member is standing for more than one local board. Because of course, Mr. Speaker, knowing that you've read every word in this bill, you'll know, Mr. Speaker, that the way in which the bill is structured is that one can stand for more than one local board, but they have to rank which local board is of most interest to them and is their higher priority. That will, of course, create some interesting electoral situations for people where if you do want to stand, if an individual does want to stand for more than one local board, they will have to actually say to a community that the other community is more important to them. And imagine if you were a voter in a local board election and you saw that Mr. XYZ, Joe Bloggs, had ranked your local board area as their third priority. I have to say, if a member was going to say to me as a voter that I'd only be their second or third or fourth priority of the community, I'd be rather disappointed by that. And so greater transparency around the interests of members is also something which is going to be welcomed through this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, as an individual who has had experience in local government, both in the old system, the good old days of Manukau, Auckland, Waitakere, North Shore, back in the old system, having had experience there as a community board member, as a city councillor, and briefly sitting on the Auckland Council too, I can say that I see this as a model which is going to be beneficial for Auckland. And I thank Alfred Nara and I thank Maggie Barry for bringing this to the House. I also thank the other members across the chamber for their wholehearted support for such a change that's being proposed here. I commend this bill to the House.
I call Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You may be relieved to know this is going to be quite a short contribution on the Local Government Act 2014 Amendment Bill number 3 in the name of the member Alfred Naro, and I would like to offer my congratulations to